By now it should be common knowledge that Dragon Ball originally started off as a loose parody of the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. The four main characters of Dragon Ball are all analogous to the four main characters of Journey to the West, but with comical spins placed on each of them that involved more gag humor than martial arts or fantasy. With that said, I find that Dragon Ball's roots as a parody story often get downplayed by fans more familiar with the modern stuff. Make no mistake, Akira Toriyama is primarily a gag manga artist, and he began Dragon Ball with the intent of creating a funny kid story parodying the popular martial arts films of actors like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. You might say that Dragon Ball's eventual evolution into a more straightforward action-based epic was a result of Toriyama making his series accidentally badass, but that just goes to show how talented and creative a writer Toriyama really is, something else that gets downplayed within the fan community, but that's a topic for another day. For today, I want to take some time to discuss a few elements from the first two arcs of Dragon Ball that display, in no uncertain terms, that rather than just being a simple gag manga like Dr. Slump, Dragon Ball was intended to be a parody, and not just a parody of Journey to the West, but a parody of the common tropes of the wuxia genre as a whole. But wait, what the heck is wuxia, you ask? Well, to put it very basically, and trust me, I am not an expert on this stuff, wuxia is a genre of Chinese fiction that literally translates to martial hero, as in a hero whose skill in martial arts is so extreme, it's more like superpowers. In wuxia, heroes typically master their ki or chi to such a superhuman extent that they can use it to perform inhuman feats of strength and speed, as well as more versatile powers, like the ability to harness their ki and shoot it out as a concussive beam. A wuxia hero will typically be characterized by their desire to grow stronger and find worthy opponents as they wander the land, and due to their honorable and benevolent nature will often find themselves righting wrongs done against the common people. Does any of that sound familiar? Dragon Ball might have popularized these tropes here in the West, but Akira Toriyama didn't create them. There's an entire genre of this stuff, and it's called wuxia. So that's just a fun bit of trivia for all the hardcore fans. Although I would be amiss if I didn't mention the fact that Dragon Ball is Japanese and not Chinese, and Japan technically does not accept wuxia as an actual word, but anybody can see from the definitions that Dragon Ball is 100% wuxia parody, which eventually evolved into a more straightforward wuxia tale. And with that said, I'm sure calling Dragon Ball 100% parody isn't going to go down well with certain fans, but before you ignite those keyboards with the blistering heat of your fury, just let me state my case on this. Now, a common wuxia hero archetype is called a yuxia. You can basically think of this as the Chinese equivalent of the wandering samurai cliché, or even an Old West gunslinger. In a nutshell, a yuxia is a warrior who aimlessly wanders the world, seeking nothing but ways to improve their fighting skills, adventure, and worthy opponents to fight against. A yuxia is typically a badass, independent outsider. They care not for societal norms, or even the law. They live by their own code of honor, their own drive to become stronger, and are kind enough to use their powers to fight injustice should they stumble across any during their adventures. Do any of these traits ring a bell? Why, the yuxia of Dragon Ball is Goku, our badass, anti-authoritarian hero who wanders the land and fights injustice is just a small, round boy who talks like a hick and likes to fight people. Yeah, a little-known fact to all the dub fans. In Toriyama's story, Goku's accent is typical of a hick or a hillbilly, using words like ain't and calling Master Roshi old-timer to reflect his upbringing in the wild. Just a little something that got lost in translation. So, just to give you an image of all this in your mind, try to imagine that you're reading the newest X-Men comic, and Wolverine is going on a secret mission to feudal Japan to undermine the corrupt monarchy, and he gets partnered up with a legendary master samurai who's gonna help him, and then he meets the samurai, and it's just some smiling redneck who has no idea what any of this political stuff means and just wants to fight people. Not what you'd be expecting, right? And that's what Goku was. It almost seems like every element of his character was perfectly crafted to be the exact antithesis of a typical yuxia. I mean, sure, some of them in some stories can be energetic and humorous characters, but even when that happens, it's somewhat of an intentional inversion of the normal trope. And even then, I've never seen a yuxia who is just so much of an idiot as Goku is. What kind of a hero goes around smacking people's crotches because he can't tell the difference between boys and girls? What kind of a hero needs to be told when to rescue people?
Goku, these bad men need to be taken care of or they might hurt us! Okay.
Even down to his character design, Goku is the exact opposite of a badass. He's just a small boy. He barely even comes up to Bulma's waist. And look at how round he is. Is that really what you think of when you hear the word badass? Round people? This is our main hero? Going around foiling evildoers with his fist of the rock, paper, scissors? I feel like it's going to be difficult for American fans to really appreciate how bizarre and comical Goku's character was during the first 2 arcs of Dragon Ball. Not only because we're just totally used to that being our Goku, but also because Goku kind of made the whole idiot hero thing a real trope in Shonen. But just imagine this is the year 1984, and you're just a small Japanese boy opening up an issue of Shonen Jump. The last thing you were expecting from this supposed martial arts epic was this. Let's dig a little deeper. Who is our other residential badass of the series? And I use the term badass sarcastically. Well, it's Yamcha. And unlike Goku, Yamcha actually does fill out the badass quota pretty decently. And I know that might sound weird, but again, forget all the memes and the internet jokes. You're just a Japanese boy reading Dragon Ball in Weekly Shonen Jump for the first time. This is your first introduction to Yamcha. And he's actually pretty cool. He's a notorious desert bandit and a skilled swordsman. He's ruthless, he's intelligent, he has a flying shape-shifting cat as his personal servant. Yeah, let me know when Batman gets one of those. And just look at his design. He's a badassly designed character. Yeah, badassly is a word now. At first, Yamcha seems like a very straightforward, typical wuxia villain. Bandits are a pretty cliched villain in wuxia, so it makes sense. However, this villain has a crippling weakness. He's afraid of girls.
She's gorgeous.
So, to put all this together for you, imagine if at the end of Star Wars, Darth Vader was fighting Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader takes the advantage. All hope seems lost. Then, just as Vader is about to deliver the finishing blow, he sees an attractive woman walk by, and then he's just like, and then she looks at him and he passes out. Hooray, what a victory for the heroes. Ironically, the more we learn about our villains Yamcha and Puar, the more they end up seeming like far better people than our actual protagonists. As mentioned, the main hero is kind of an idiot who only cares about fighting. Then we have Bulma, the stand-in for Xuanzong from Journey to the West, although instead of being an honorable monk making a journey to retrieve Buddhist text, she is a spoiled and absolutely selfish teenage girl on a quest to ask an omnipotent dragon god to make her a cute boyfriend. Then, lastly on our team of wonderful heroes is Oolong, the perverted, shape-shifting pig who doesn't hesitate to either kidnap little girls or drug Bulma so that while she's sleeping, you get the idea. Yamcha, on the other hand, is objectively much more noble in his goals. Besides the whole bandit thing, he apparently dreams of settling down and getting married, and wants to use the Dragon Balls to wish away his nervousness around women. Not even for the perfect woman to just magically appear like Bulma plans to ask for with a man. Instead, Yamcha just wants to wish away his fear so that he can get a woman on his own. Puar isn't a very well fleshed out character, but she is Yamcha's servant, seemingly by choice, and the two seem to have a very strong and respecting relationship. Compare that to Bulma forcing the unwilling Oolong to being her servant with threats of diarrhea torture, and Oolong attempting to abandon the team every chance he gets. If not for Goku's pureness balancing the scales, Yamcha and Puar would certainly be seen as the heroes of this journey. Although even in Goku's case, simply having a pure heart isn't really enough to balance things when you're such an incompetent hero. You need to be told when to rescue people, and then faint in the middle of battle as soon as you get too hungry. Seriously, Goku is like the worst hero ever in these first 2 arcs. Without a doubt, the most obvious parody element in Dragon Ball is Toriyama's version of a Sennin. Now again, this might be hard for non-Japanese fans to fully appreciate since Sennin isn't exactly a common word in English, but just try and imagine. In Japan, a Sennin is basically an archetype of the old wise master cliché. In wuxia, a Sennin's direct equivalent is called a Zien. That's X-I-A-N. And the idea is that this master has spent his entire life so devoted to mastering their martial arts that they have achieved a state of such utter mastery that they may no longer be entirely human anymore. Besides that, the Sennin is of course the master character, so they must be defined by their wisdom and purity. Master Roshi was originally introduced as the Kame Sennin, or Turtle Hermit as Funimation chose to translate it, although I think the term Turtle Sage would get the idea across better. Anyway, his character fills out all these requirements as the wise and aged master. Part of his training regimen even includes specifically teaching Goku and Krillin to overcome human limits. The Toriyama twist with him is that since he's such an old man, he's also a lecherous old pervert. And it might be difficult for American fans to fully appreciate just how comical this idea is, since we don't really have a Sennin archetype. But just imagine someone in our pop culture who fills out this trope, like Gandalf, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Dumbledore. Wise masters who are filled with purity, maturity, and, well, wisdom. Then we have Dragon Ball's version of a Sennin who's just so goddamn goofy. And of course, this Sennin has to be visited by a monk who seeks training from the wise and legendary master. In typical wuxia fashion, this monk has made a long and perilous journey in order to reach the Sennin's home. In wuxia fiction, monks are some of the most single-mindedly devoted character types of all. They literally devote every single waking hour of their existence purely towards mastering their art. They live in seclusion, often among other monks, and live for the sole purpose of nothing more than training and practicing martial arts, just for the sake of being the best martial artists they can be. They know nothing of the outside world, so it follows suit that in Toriyama's Parody, the monk character only seeks martial arts training so that he can impress girls, and in order to coax the wise Sennin into training him, bribes him with nudie magazines. And it's not like the journey to reach Roshi was that treacherous anyway. The fact that he just lives in the middle of the ocean in a pink house might be a subtle bit of satire in its own right. In wuxia, Zeons usually isolate themselves from society in remote and treacherous locations. If a yusha or monk wants to receive training from them, just reaching them is usually a quest in itself. The aged master swears off all modern technology and comforts, and lives a simple, rustic life where he can focus on his trainings. So when Goku comes to ask Master Roshi for training, imagine the surprise when the old Sennin is just sitting in front of a television screen, oogling over women's workout videos, and when Goku says that he's hungry, Roshi just casually tells him to check the fridge. Later on, when they switch islands, Roshi just busts out his freaking hover car to make the journey and nobody says a word. Master Roshi has gotta be one of my favorite characters in Dragon Ball, just because he's so rounded and multi-dimensional. In the end, despite all of his goofiness, thanks to Toriyama's excellent writing, the character still does end up being a genuine wise master type. So he really is a Sennin. He's just also a really goofy guy. And it's this character, coupled with all the other various gags during the arc, that arguably make the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai an even more straightforward parody than the first arc. Tournaments and tournament arcs are fairly cliched in wuxia. So, does Toriyama making the goofiest tournament possible not embody the idea of a parody? This tournament has opponents such as Bacterion, the warrior who uses his own stench as his greatest weapon, and Ranfan, the warrior whose fighting style revolves around stripping so that her opponents can't look at her. There's no serious fighters here. Even Nam, who began with a straightforward and pretty tragic story, ended up being played for comic relief in the end. And maybe that's just what makes Dragon Ball so enjoyable. Like its characters, the storyline itself is multifaceted. We have the first two arcs, which are straightforward gag parody, then the atmosphere gradually begins to shift into less gag fun and more adventure fun with the Red Ribbon Army arc. Then the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai is the first instance of a mostly serious story in the franchise. And although it definitely retains its fair share of gags, by this point, Dragon Ball is no longer a gag-based manga. Rather, the characters have become, well, genuine characters with multifaceted personalities instead of just parodies of common tropes. And so instead of being a gag manga, it's a real story that just has a lot of jokes, if that makes any sense. After a very gradual shift in tone across multiple arcs, Dragon Ball had finally made its transition from wuxia parody into just straightforward wuxia. And with Krillin's apparent death in the King Piccolo arc darkening the tone even further, well, let's just say the rest is history.